I did want to ask you too about briefly here because you've had such a there's so many places we could go. You've had such an adventuresome life, and I've listened to you many times tell the stories of when you were stationed in Greece and you were dealing with the left. And the first thing that came to my mind was in the case of these leftist organizations, that one of which I think tried to have you unalived, shall we say.
Yeah.
Um, uh, and feel free to rehearse that story if you'd like, because I think this audience may not have heard it. But the first thing that comes to my mind when I hear this kind of stuff is who funds these things? Like, I've never even heard of this this organization that was radical left.
Yeah.
And we always look to the money to see, who's funding this, who's
Yeah.
pushing this, who would fund such a thing, and why would it be Soviet? I mean, the Cold War is kind of coming to an end. Like, who would be
Yeah.
behind that?
Oh my God. I could talk about this for the next 2 hours. I'm going to make it short. So the group you're talking about is called Revolutionary Organization 17 November. God, where do I even begin? Okay, let's talk about. I'll tell you the first time we ever heard of 17 November. In October of 1975, the CIA named a new station chief in Athens. His name was Richard Welch. Dick Welch was a Philhellene. He was a lover of all things Greek. He had a degree in the classics. He spoke ancient Greek. He spoke modern Greek. He got a master's degree in archaeology. This guy just loved everything Greece. And he's named CIA station chief in Athens. So he arrives. 6 weeks later, on December 23rd, 1975, he's invited to the U.S. ambassador's Christmas party. He and his wife go to the ambassador's Christmas party in their chauffeur-driven car. They have a good time by all accounts. And at the end of the party, they drive back to their house in a very close-in, very high-end suburb of Athens called Psychiko. These are the days before automatic door openers or gate openers. So the driver pulls up to the gate and gets out of the car to open the gate to drive into the property. There's a car parked directly across the street. There are 3 men and a woman inside the car. We never identified the woman. 2 of the men get out of the car, and one of them shouts in Greek, "Richard Welch, get out of the car." Dick gets out of the car, and Mrs. Welch gets out of the car. The driver runs for his life. One of the men says, "Richard Welch, you have been found guilty of crimes against the Greek people, and you've been sentenced to death," and then shoots him 3 times in the chest with a .45 caliber semi-automatic handgun that became known as the Welch 45. They killed 18 more people with that same gun between 1975 and 2002. They then got back in the car and drove away. The Greek police were so inept that the killers had to call the cops a week ago and say, "You idiots, the getaway car we left abandoned at the intersection of this street and that street. Go get it." In the meantime, the killers wrote a manifesto. Now, this became a theme. They would write a manifesto at almost every attack over the next 27 years. But this manifesto, they sent to a sympathizer in Paris, and the sympathizer in Paris hand-delivered it to the French philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre. Sartre read it and said, "What is this craziness?" And he literally put it in a desk drawer and forgot about it. A year later, the former chief of the Greek National Police, a man named Malios, he had been the chief of the Greek National Police during the military dictatorship, and he was a deeply hated torturer. He would leave his apartment every single day at the same time and buy a newspaper and go to the coffee shop and drink coffee. And this one day in April of 1976, he came out of his apartment. There was a man and a woman there making out. And he told us later on his deathbed that he smiled when he saw them, and he thought to himself, young love in the spring. As soon as he walked past them, the man pulled out the Welch 45 and shot him 3 times in the back. He lived for 2 hours, and the description he gave of the shooter matched Mrs. Welch's description of the shooter in her husband's assassination. They sent another manifesto to Jean-Paul Sartre. So Sartre receives it. Actually, Sartre didn't receive it. Henri Lévy, what's his name? Bernard-Henri Lévy, who is today France's most famous philosopher and poet, and was Sartre's assistant at the time. He said, "Wait a minute, we've received something like this before," and he found the original one in the desk. And then he sent them both to Libération magazine or newspaper. It's the leftist newspaper in Paris. They published them. That put 17 November on the map. 17 November was named after the date in 1974 when there was a student uprising at the Athens Polytechnic University, where the military dictatorship in its final death throes opened fire with tanks on unarmed students. And to hear the students tell it, killed 500. To hear the fascists tell it, they killed 36. We'll never know. They destroyed most of the bodies. But that put 17 November on the map. Now, you ask a very, very important question. Where did they get the money? We just assumed in 1975 that these guys were tied to the KGB. But we had a long-standing agreement with the KGB. You don't kill our guys, and we don't kill your guys. We try to recruit each other's guys, but no killing. And the Russians came to us and they said, listen, this was not us. It just was not us. And then the Bulgarians proactively came to us and said, we promise this was not us, and we can tell you it was not the Soviets. We couldn't figure out who it was. So how did they get their money? How did they self-finance? They would rob banks and post offices. Now, remember, these were the days when everything was done in cash, everything. And they would just rob banks and post offices in broad daylight. And then they would raid police stations in the middle of the night, grab the handful of cops that were on duty, tie them up, hold them hostage, steal all of their weapons and all of their ammunition. And just to add insult to injury, there is a large military museum in Athens, right in the center of Athens. The Greeks are very proud of it. And in the 1980s, somebody who was a member of 17 November went into the military museum and realized that none of the weapons on display had been deactivated. They were all live weapons on display. Rocket launchers, machine guns. So they went one day, a group of 4 terrorists went just as the museum opened, took everybody hostage, and then just took all of these live weapons off the wall. And then a couple of months later, they raided a military weapons depot in Larissa in central Greece and stole all the ammunition needed for the weapons that they stole from the military museum. So they self-financed, they self-armed, and then there were specialty weapons that they somehow came into the possession of. And that's where I came in. I was able to identify analytically a connection between 17 November and Carlos the Jackal. And if your viewers don't know who Carlos the Jackal was, he was the Osama bin Laden of the 1970s and 80s. He was the most feared terrorist on the planet. He was a Venezuelan communist named Ilyich Ramirez Sanchez, and he went by Carlos. The media dubbed him Carlos the Jackal, loosely based on the book that led to the movie The Day of the Jackal. And Carlos provided the group with the weapons that they needed that they couldn't steal. In 2000, I was stationed in Greece from 1998 to 2000. And my entire reason for being in Greece was to infiltrate and destroy 17 November. We promised Mrs. Welch in 1975 we would find her husband's killers and we would bring them to justice, and we meant it. It took 27 years. But I took delivery of a fully armored, level 4 armored BMW 540. My next door neighbor was the newly arrived British defense attaché, Stephen Saunders, Brigadier General, 1 star. I liked Stephen a lot, but he was a media whore. Anytime he saw a camera, he would run right in front of it and offer up an interview, and he would just loved being on TV. We happened to be invited to a cocktail party the night of the day that I took delivery of the new car. And I was standing with Stephen, with the American defense attaché and the French defense attaché. And Stephen was making fun of me because of my new car. As I said, we lived next door to, not next door, but our backyards abutted. And he says to me, "You Americans, you're so paranoid about security." He said, "This is an EU country. It's a NATO country. What are you so afraid of?" And everybody starts to chuckle. And I said to him, "You Brits live in a dream world. If you think that because they have pretty beaches and palm trees that they're not going to kill you if they have the chance, believe me, if they have the chance, they're going to kill you." And then we all laughed again. To make a long story short, 2 weeks later, they killed him. And they killed him in broad daylight during the morning rush. They finally issued a manifesto several months afterwards in which they specifically said that they set out that morning to kill me, but that I was driving an armored car and they knew that I was armed. And it said, "And so we elected to carry out the revolutionary sentence on the war criminal Saunders." And so that killing, everybody liked Stephen. That killing was what began to change public opinion. 17 November would attack. They killed the Turkish ambassador, the Turkish deputy ambassador. They killed the head of the federal tax office. They killed the governor of the central bank. They killed the minister of finance. They killed the minister of communications. But they were largely seen as Robin Hood, right? Oh, taxes were raised. They set fire to 6 tax offices and then murder the head of the tax service. And people are like, "Oh, okay, well, they're for the poor people." No, they're not for the poor people. It's an armed criminal gang is all it is. So in 2002, in April of 2002, a man was walking in Piraeus with a paper bag, like a grocery bag, carrying a bomb. And he was going to put the bomb underneath the car of a billionaire ship owner, and the bomb went off. It blew off both of his hands and blew out his right eye. And as he was bleeding to death, a policeman runs across the street, takes off his own shirt to staunch the blood squirting out of his stumps. And the guy confesses to being 17 November's chief bomber. He names all the members of 17 November, and he gives the address of the safe house where all the weapons are stored. And then he survived. And so the Greeks were able to arrest all of them. The 3 most prominent members received sentences of 1,765 years in prison. The only 2 things that the cops were never able to recover were the old school typewriter that they used to type the manifestos and the Welch 45. It's out there somewhere. But anyway, they were unusual in that the Soviet Union was far too liberal for them. They were old school Stalinists. They wanted you to fall into line or face death. And they saw themselves as the ones to carry out that policy.